Guys, hey, is this your first time having a main character be morally wrong? 'Cause I know it's not. This is the most bizarre relationship with the Tumblr sexy man I've ever seen a fanbase have. The ups and downs of Jax's popularity should honestly be studied for insight into the human psyche, which is kind of what I'm gonna do on a vague and unprofessional level. Because perhaps being a character that can garner such polarizing reactions is the reason why Jax is the most interesting Tumblr sexy man I have ever consumed. Or maybe just because she's not really a man at all.
I'm just a misunderstood little chicken fetus in an egg that needs to be cracked open. Well, I am not.
It's funny that I feel so frustrated by the hate of Jax now, because honestly, I started out just like these people. I used to hate that he was loved. When I saw this fuck-ass purple rabbit with the Cheshire grin grace my computer screen, and then looked at the fans' love at first sight, my thought was, oh brother, here we go again. Because this pattern has occurred countless of times already. A total bastard with a shit-eating grin waltzes into this show, and he's the f***ing worst guy, but the fandom gets any hint that he's been hurt or can be sympathetic, and everyone forgives him for everything, and the entire time, all the fandom will talk about is this one guy, while I have to scavenge for crumbs of the other characters. Typically the female characters I like better. Here we go again. I was over Jax before Jax even began, and what's weird is Jax did technically follow that pattern, but a lot of the fandom didn't. And I did, in a way I never have before. So, what the f*** is different about Jax? The fans' weird relationship began at the reaction to episode 2, after a 6-month gap between the release of the instant hit, that was episode 1, to episode 2. By episode 2, I think people kind of forgot who Jax was, because they didn't really know him yet. Since people instantly fell in love with Jax and had nothing else to go on but the pilot to understand him for 6 months, I think people fabricated their own version of Jax in their head. And when episode 2 inevitably didn't meet that standard, people insisted he had been changed and disliked the character that existed. And maybe because of the continued gaps, I think this is a phenomenon that has followed the fan reception to Jax throughout his entire run. With that, I want to introduce a psychology term I learnt for this video. The primacy effect. That's right, I'm bringing out a psychology theory for Rubber Hose Bonnie. The primary effect states that the first information you learn about someone carries more weight than the info you learn later, because within seconds you create a fully formed impression. That impression acts as a lens which we filter subsequent information through. Jax's mask in full force in episode 1, the impression formed about him was that he's a casually mean, funny fella. Let that lens cement in people's heads for 6 months. Then episode 2 rolls in, Jax is more manic, and his mask a little weakened. It feels like a fallacy. This impression lens is also affected by the prior standards we have. People immediately created a sympathetic lens to look at him through, despite no actual evidence for it, basing it on previous iterations of this trope that do that. They immediately create the impression that Jax will do the same. As for me, since I never cared for him in the first place, and never did any of that, I saw absolutely no difference between episode 1 Jax and episode 2 Jax. Despite being very familiar with this trope too, that knowledge didn't affect my lens enough to like him immediately. Probably because I was tired of it, or I needed a little more evidence first. But it did still give me the expectation, so that when we did get that information, I was very receptive to it. Honestly, every episode made me like Jax a little more. Specifically 4 and 5, because we learned a lot more about him in those episodes. And I love having a character's juicy emotional guts to poke and prod at. And by then, that little spike of Jax hate seemed to have died down on my algorithm. A stadium of fans and some haters. He was becoming a more broad character that could fit more people's initial impressions, and was repeatedly getting dunked on by the characters. Becoming more sympathetic and getting punished, but also not changing from his initial character traits. I mildly began to like him. Things were pretty chill. Until I arrived at the episode where I f***ing got it. I finally understood why people love this purple rabbit so much.
There's nothing more to me. So please, just stop looking.
Oh my god, dude, it was like when people have like a spiritual awakening, except if spiritual awakenings were prompted by a pathetic piece of shit. It was Jax's episode. Jax had begun down the path destined for characters like him. Began getting close to the protagonist, opening up the path laid out perfectly for him to begin a redemption arc. But wait. Jax already saw himself and everyone as a character. Which means he knew exactly how to dodge this. As soon as it got too real, he actively rejected the path laid out for him. He shoved it away and desperately chose not to leave his archetype, with the most egregious, cartoony villain monologue. Even when it's painfully clear there is more to him, he was too terrified to change. He was too terrified to be seen as any more than his trope. Jax chose not to be redeemed, ending with a desperate plea to not see anything more. He convinced himself there is none. And even if it is there, she's too scared to find out. With this, Jax begins to tell you, you can't save everyone. Underneath all that typical bastard shit, sometimes is just someone who is truly, honestly fucked. And God, I swooned. Not romantically, but just like swooned for the character writing. I'm really drawn to characters that are so damaged they can't bring themselves to change, even if some part of them really wants to. It's so tragic. It lets me wonder endlessly of what could have been, and it's also just so f***ing real. I don't know what this says about me. It's too hard to tell. My perspective is too biased on myself. But I could ponder what it means for other people, because I think this episode is where some people started to lose it with him. What I loved about this episode was that I stopped seeing the cartoony dickhead with the shit-eating grin that it could maybe change someday. I started to see someone real, someone I have met before, and I think other people saw that too. So many cis men, or at least AMAB people, are so much like this.
It's 'cause it's funny. I do everything 'cause it's funny. 'Cause I'm the funny one.
Grown from the roots of misogyny and toxic masculinity, they become this unserious, joking, apathetic asshole who refuses to be real with anyone. I have seen so many people like this, online and in real life, and I understand why it becomes hard to love a character like that when it reminds you of the real people that you hate and that hurt you. Especially when one character is still trying so hard to reach out and help that person. I understand that it's really hard to extend any sympathy to someone like Jax. I understand why it hurts to see him get that on the screen when someone like Jax has hurt you, and when so many characters like this have gotten these stories told more than yours. Honestly, if Jax was someone in my life, I would not be able to overcome my own hurt to reach out to them. It's not worth it, and they don't deserve it. Okay, I don't know who needs to hear this, but just want to stress this. Seriously, they do not, at all. You don't owe anyone forgiveness. Protect yourself first. But what I love so much about fiction is that I can see the sympathetic sides and see the parts that I relate to and see someone who can be funny or likable or a whirlwind to watch, all in a character who, in real life, I couldn't stand to be near long enough to see any of that. Because I'm not being hurt by Jax, I am able to look at him as a person from a more objective point of view, and therefore, it can help me understand the people in real life that are like Jax. I can connect with them in a way where I am still safe and in control. But many people didn't have an objective point of view with Jax. Many people formed a close bond with this character. People had a lot of time to create expectations for this character. Many people didn't have an objective point of view because they have been hurt by someone exactly like Jax. What now influences the lens is real-life, hurtful experiences, and I think that prompted people to actually process the bad things Jax has done. Because before then, I think people saw it as much sillier, but as we got to know Jax better, the more real it felt. And then to take that feeling and continue to give Jax story focus, yeah, it feels shitty. Hate for Jax particularly spiked after episode 8 because they perceived this scene as forgiveness. But that's not what it was, and I don't think that's what the show wants you to learn. The show doesn't give Jax focus because it wants you to believe in him. It gives Jax focus to show you what you shouldn't be. To show you how pathetic and miserable Jax is as he continues down this path, because he's so lost in his own self-hate and insecurity. And then show you that someone like Pomni and the other characters who value people around them even when it's hard, who overcome their insecurities to reach out to people, they become increasingly confident and happy and close to other people. No, Jax wasn't forgiven. But as empathetic people, they still don't want him to die. And everyone seeing Jax's emotional instability finally on full display instead of hidden behind his mask, they see him as a person like them. They realize how little power Jax has. Episode 8 is when the characters finally take his power away from him. They see past what Jax wants them to see, what allows Jax to be defensive. They see that Jax isn't this all-powerful villain. He's just a fucked-up human like them. A terrible one, of course, but just a human nonetheless. And he has just as much power to keep them in or get them out as anyone else there. The show doesn't want you to forgive these people in your life. The show wants you to not give them power by treating them like their mask, so that you can focus on more pressing matters while they are left to actually deal with their issues themselves. Everyone, except Pomni, got pretty distant from Jax, honestly. And they're in a circus, fighting against a rogue AI together, so they can't get that far away from Jax. But they can learn how to live with him. Jax is left with no working defenses in episode 8, and that leaves him to begin facing himself with no mask, no jokes left, just his misery. So now he has the choice to either improve or fall deeper into the prison he locked himself into. And after a reopened emotional wound, he chose to fall, because it's too late for her. Jax suddenly abstracts, because that's often how it goes in real life. It feels sudden. With Jax spilling at the seams, we finally get to see the guts underneath her shell. And Jesus Christ, she is not fucking lovely, bitch. Usually with a character like this, if you were gonna go into their mind, the goal would be to make them more sympathetic. But honestly, this mostly made Jax less. In Jax's mindscape, we're greeted by violent, unrealistic scenarios. We see the cruel, apathetic, and misogynistic ways he tries to perceive things in detail. We see that the part of her who could have been kind and sweet is chained to her mind, unable to ever meet anyone outside. We continue to see Jax's shame in herself come out in ugly ways. We see the lengths she'll go to make everything feel fake. We see all the worst parts of her together at a table. In Jax's real actions, we see that Jax was someone that could have opened up, because Jax was loved. Which makes the subsequent actions all the more cruel. Jax's backstory reveals a complicated relationship with masculinity, where Jax was both punished for showing vulnerability, resulting in her never opening up, but was simultaneously punished for typical shows of masculinity, resulting in him hating to be called out on it too, creating a double-sided self-hate that no matter what Jax does, she feels insecure. It portrays the way gender oppresses people by constantly giving you two standards to meet. You're unable to conform to either, and are placed in a constant state of being punished for who you are. This is a human experience everyone goes through in one way or another. And especially when it's extreme like this, from a parent, and especially when our gender doesn't even align with what we're seen as, some people handle that in a really bad way. Some people don't overcome the insecurity that it brings. Example, Jax. The last time Jax opened up before this scene was the most extreme version of being punished for both. This experience placed the idea that Jax is a bad person firmly in her head. That if she opens up and gets close to someone again, they will hurt her, and she will hurt them, because in her most vulnerable, honest moment, she was berated and did something awful. She believes who she really is not only shameful, but is also fundamentally hurtful and bad and wrong. Anything resembling that moment is terrifying. This vulnerable fact, being in this echo chamber with Ribbit, was something Jax could slowly become okay with, but when reminded of the idea that anyone could know this, that Ribbit could break Jax's defenses at any time, that was terrifying. So Jax ensured that it would never happen in the cruelest way. Jax became terrible to others because she believed that's all she was, making any genuine love or affection feel like a lie. Too consumed by fear, we see Jax sink deeper and deeper into the persona she created. The more and more it goes, she feels it's too late. The deeper she buries herself, the harder it is to dig out. I love how blatant it is that Jax did this to herself.
I did this to myself.
She had someone supportive. She could have begun to change and open up, but she didn't. Jax is a cautionary tale on what happens if you repress yourself and push everyone away to such an extent. What happens if you become too consumed by your own fear and insecurity and self-hate? This aligns with the show's themes of how important our relationships are and the importance of living our lives the way we want to, despite what could hold us back, despite the fear and insecurity and self-hate we have. The finale shows each path. The people who were able to, someone who screwed up and overcame the insecurity to get better, and the one who didn't, but could have. Because at the end of the day, it can be just as simple as, you could have just talked to me, man. All the other characters were able to overcome their fears and become closer to each other. We see that Jax herself could have changed, and characters that could have accepted it, but Jax locked herself in a prison. Basically, the message of the story is, don't pull a Jax. But it's okay, because then she took up a full-time job of haunting me, so Dude, ever since I watched episode 9, this Chud Rabbit won't leave me alone. Turns out, getting a trans character like this really meant a lot to me. Who would have guessed? But boy, did it rock this fandom like a storm, holy shit. Tumblr Sexy Man, fan favorite character, who then began to be more hated, and then turned out to actually be a trans woman, written in a way that wasn't spoon-fed, all in a fandom that's already been becoming very toxic. Wow, it sure has been an experience seeing the reaction to that. Oh boy. But you know what? Fuck all that. I'm gonna tell you why the trans representation that is this bastard means so much to me as a trans person. I love that a trans character gets to be a horrible person in a realistic way, and still be given the same amount of empathy for it. I believe in the hopeful stories of transition that show trans people that they can become themselves in a beautiful way, that it can be wonderful. And the representation of trans people as good people, because plenty of real trans people are good, and people should know that we're not villains. As absolutely crucial as those stories are, I think stories of the opposite are just as important. Some trans people never learn to accept themselves and never leave the closet or never even crack their egg. Sometimes we drown under the intense fear or insecurity or sexism, staying closeted and repressed. And people should know those stories just as much as the good. People should know how bad and ugly this can get. And guess what? Some trans people are horrible people, sometimes because of repression, and sometimes just regardless. Trans people are actually just people, which means we can be all sorts of ways. We're people that are just as affected by the social standards around us, and sometimes we don't handle the fears and insecurity and sexism well. Sometimes we handle it really badly. That's a fact. So we shouldn't have to be under the pressure to constantly be portrayed as a good example in fiction. Because if people are only ever shown the beautiful parts of this experience and not the ugly parts, then we will get more harshly punished in cases like this where we don't fit their interpretation. Just like how we shouldn't be portrayed only as villains so that we won't be expected to be bad all the time. We shouldn't be expected to be anything. We're just fucking people. And we deserve the same amount of empathy for our feelings and the same amount of punishment for our bad actions as a cis person gets. I hate that any time a lot of people don't like a queer character, the excuse most often used is, it's bad representation. And look, if you're a trans person and this isn't your preferred type of representation, then sure. Of course, you don't have to like Jax as trans rep, but unless the goal of Jax's character is simply to make fun of trans people, which it obviously isn't, then that's not objectively bad representation. Obviously, the show isn't here to push a stereotype of trans people are abusive assholes, because otherwise, Zubul literally wouldn't exist. Zubul is there to show that as a trans person, Jax could have overcome insecurities, been vulnerable, been kind, gotten close to people, and been out of the closet. The same age as Jax in everything. Zubul represents the opposite in terms of a trans experience. We got two trans characters who are very different in the same show. Isn't that awesome? That's exactly the type of representation I want. But most of all, I don't think Jax can be objectively bad representation because she is literally written by a real-life trans woman based on her real-life feelings and experiences.
This is clearly a very personal story to Goose. And I hadn't met Goose before we started working on this, but it was a several-year-long project, so we've gotten to know Goose quite well. And so Goose hands you a script that says, hey, here's a character that kind of represents like the worst version of myself. You know, all of this intrusive thoughts and like things about myself that I've changed, that I don't really like about myself. Here is the worst case scenario where everything goes wrong for me and what happens. And I'm like, that's messed up. That is messed up. It's a deeply personal story.
Jax is a version of a real trans woman that never got better. Jax is real. And just because she isn't the type of trans representation you want, or doesn't fit your expectation of what a trans character should look like, doesn't mean she's bad representation. Isn't our goal equality? There's so many cis characters that get to be horrible, cruel people, even directly because of their gender. People don't question why. People don't call that a bad way to present cis people. Trans characters should be granted the same benefit of the doubt that sometimes characters are bad people in order to tell a story. Jax is a bad person in order to tell a story.
If Jax were to just randomly unabstract, what would you guys say and do?
That would defeat the purpose of Jax's character arc.
Jax coming back would completely undermine the entire purpose of the story and her journey. And I know that's hard, but it's hard on purpose, right?
Yeah.
It's a story of consequence, and hopefully you choose different paths than Jax did.
And her being trans adds to that story. Queer characters shouldn't have to get questioned and harshly punished for that in a way cis characters don't. I understand not necessarily liking the writing execution of this plotline, but what's unfair is that the immediate assumption to that from so many people is that this is just some pointless headcanon or self-insert. Why is that the first assumption? Maybe she did have a point, maybe she just wrote it not in the best way, but she still had a point. This was still an important part of Jax's character, even if you didn't like the execution of it. If Jax was written by a cis person, I would understand questioning what that person might be pushing about an experience they haven't been through. But this is not the case. Why are we telling a queer person to write their queer character based on their queerness differently? Isn't the whole reason we strive to get here in media is so that queer writers can write their queer characters however they want? Maybe Jax isn't bad rep. Maybe you just treat trans characters that differently than cis characters, and that's unfair. It's unfair that people deny this integral part of Jax's character just because they didn't make it crystal clear for you, or just because you weren't expecting it, when you wouldn't react like that towards any other plot twist. It's unfair that the first time someone online messaged me to kill myself and commented a slur on one of my posts was when I was loudly, openly posting about a character's transness more than ever. It's unfair that I feel this defensive of a character whose story meant a lot to me, just because she happens to be trans. So fuck that. I'm not gonna be defensive anymore. This reaction to Jax's transness is exactly why trans characters like Jax are so important. Why every trans character, based on real trans people's feelings and experiences, is so important. In this case, maybe if we see more trans characters that show us the ugly parts, maybe someday, in the far, far future, people won't have such insane reactions to a trans character being as cruel as a cis character. I also think a big part of Jax's story here is that, despite the things she's done, she still deserves empathy. Just because she was a bad person doesn't mean she's completely undeserving of any love, because she is still human, like us. And I think that's a reminder we need right now. That trans people, just as much as anyone, deserve love and empathy. Especially when the way people look at us is so scary. This whole ordeal made me realize I relate to Jax a lot more than I thought I did. I always thought of myself as not relating to Jax at all because I certainly don't relate to how mean and cruel he is. Thankfully, that was never my style of masking. My style of masking was always to make myself smaller rather than bigger. So I decided that I didn't relate to Jax. But that's because I was only looking at Jax's mask. I relate to Jax for the debilitating, paralyzing fear. Being trans is terrifying. When I first started considering the idea I might be non-binary, I would constantly tell myself I was faking it. I constantly felt like an imposter. And I hid this fact about myself for a long time, out of fear that other people would think that too. That I wouldn't even be taken seriously. Even when I did, I wasn't even able to actually say it out loud. I wore a non-binary pride flag on my bag so that my friends would see and they would ask me about it, so that all I would have to do is nod my head instead of actually have a conversation about it. I didn't even ask them to use different pronouns for me because I was afraid of being difficult. I just waited for them to ask me. And God forbid I openly talked to my parents about it. Why couldn't the show make Jax being trans more obvious? Because Jax is meant to represent how much some of us repress ourselves out of fear. Jax couldn't say it out loud.
Something I regret telling her. Something deep and personal.
And would not have been able to bear someone else saying it. Jax was so repressed, she couldn't even imagine that version of herself. Making it any more obvious would have been a betrayal to the type of trans story being told here. A trans story that I, a real trans person, can relate to. I relate to Jax for the fact that she didn't even really process she was a girl. Like Jax, I used to not process any of my feelings and sometimes still don't, or at least have a lot of trouble with it. I used to put up with, and in some areas of my life still do put up with, just being my assigned gender because it's so scary to assert something vulnerable and real about yourself. It's like you're presenting your heart to people. It's gonna hurt a lot more if that's stabbed than if you numb out any real feelings and let your shell get the stabs. I relate to Jax in feeling like a fake because as a trans person, you have to live as a fake version of yourself for so long. I relate to Jax in hiding anything that might make me vulnerable, might have me laughed at, might create distance in my relationships. And so I distance myself first, because it doesn't hurt as bad if I own the prison keys and locked myself inside. I relate to Jax in that a terrifying part of telling my parents was, what if they don't even take me seriously?
She laughed at me.
What if they laugh? What if they hate it? And most of all, what if I hurt them by showing them who I really am? I relate to Jax in that I fear that being myself will hurt those that I love. Jax shows the reasons why being trans is terrifying to me, but also why I can't let that fear consume me. Because if you're able to get past that, you get to live a life so full. You get to have people that really love you and that you love in return. You can be someone so real. You can be someone so lovely. I genuinely mourn for Jax and for everyone like her who never got to be free and who never overcame the fear, who never got to really live. And it also makes me feel so grateful that I was able to free myself, or am at least continuing my journey to be free. Seeing Jax fail, and then seeing so many people lovingly create out of her true self and embrace who she really is and could have been, reminded me how important it is to be open about this part of myself. Talking about Jax is honestly, I think, the most I've ever called myself trans. She really inspired and encouraged me to open up about this and to be open about any of my feelings. I certainly don't want to pull a Jax here. So, fuck what the strangers on the internet think, and God fuck the horrible things happening to trans people all over the world right now. I know it's terrifying. Obviously, it is so terrifying and difficult to deal with. But as long as you're alive, there is still time. You have a lot of time to get there. Your freedom matters. You deserve to live as who you are. And one day, you will find a way to get there. Reach out to the people that love you. Don't pull a Jax. Sincerely, have a good one, losers.
That's all, freaks.